What is up, everybody? Mark on the mic here, joined by my very good friend, Mr. Ryan Muckenhirn. Now, Ryan,
Mark,
we made some videos, some videos on. We did the 6-arc terminal test,
yeah,
right, where we shot the 6-arc into gel. You loaded various hand loadings with different bullets.
yes,
We did a podcast on your Howa 6-arc.
yep.
And now we're talking about some live action that kind of merges those two podcasts with your field experience fielding the 6-arc with your hand loadings, the one kind of that we selected as a little bit of the powerhouse of the bunch.
Not that I was having a little bias moment there, but I was having a little bias moment there, Mark.
Yeah, but this is cool, man. You hunted this cartridge on an antelope hunt this year, on our what appears to be annual deer hunt here in good old Wisconsin. Knocked a couple critters down.
Yes.
And that's kind of what we're talking about today is just your field experience with this cartridge and how it performed.
Yeah. So it was pretty cool. It's been somewhat of a long journey. I actually got that rifle, it's not quite 2 years ago.
Has it been that long?
Yeah. Wow. And I didn't get to start really working with it until kind of last summer. As in 2024. And it was really neat. I've developed a real fondness and a very high level of admiration for that little gun, and especially for the cartridge. And it's an adorable little case, that little 6-arc that Mark's holding right now. And that happens to be the hand load there. That's a 95 grain Barnes LRX atop that diminutive little case. And really kind of blows my socks off how sweet that gun is. And what it brought to the table. So, yeah, as you had mentioned, first hunt that I brought it on was a Wyoming pronghorn hunt, my annual that I go out on there. And it's the smallest format cartridge I've ever hunted pronghorn with. I've hunted them with 243, which is very similar, but this is a fair bit different, this 6-arc. From like a performance standpoint, from the case dimension standpoint. The rifle's very different. It's a very small rifle. Very lightweight, and blown away. I mean, where do you want me to start, Mark? I'll give you as much or as little as you want.
I mean, let's maybe recap the rifle itself real quick, exactly which one it is, and then talk about the cartridge, but kind of what you're getting out of this loading, this particular one.
Sure. So the rifle is a Howa 1500 Carbon Stalker. That is not the carbon fiber barrel version, but the very pencil weight 22-inch version that's in a Stockies carbon stock. So famously scaled rifle. I mean, it's spectacularly petite.
I was going to say, it's a petite little thing.
And very lightweight. Kitted out, I've got a suppressor on there. I've got a Viper HD 2-10 on there. It's in the 7-pound class, loaded and scoped with a can on it.
Did you put the Spartan adapter on it?
I did. I did the inlet and the universal adapter on the sling swivel stud, which I used, which was cool. So very cute little gun. And, you can go back to the podcast that Mark and I did on it where we kind of did a rifle feature of that little 1500. But the idea was kind of the commercial execution of a thought I had in my head many years ago for what I call a stick rifle. It's not my term. I didn't come up with it. But a rifle of minimal dimensions, firing a cartridge of what I'll publicly state is like minimal adequacy for killing a big game critter. Just as small, lightweight, and nimble as possible. And it's actually something I hit my head against a wall for years trying to execute without having to spend a ton of money. And I wanted a tiny cartridge, because I can build a famously lightweight 308 or a famously lightweight 243 or 708 or 6.5 Creedmoor, and I have those. But I wanted something very small. And, I'd looked at Model 7 length actions. I'd looked at, minor diameter actions like the Kimber 84 series action or, even like a Weatherby 6 lug or the Barrett Fieldcraft, which is actually a reinvention of the ultralight arms, new ultralight arms, or Forbes rifle. And nothing quite did what I wanted it to do. And then Howa dropped that darn little carbon stalker on their 1500 Mini. And it was like, well, it's exactly what I wanted in a kind of a pre-built form. Not that I was pursuant of a Howa action necessarily or otherwise, but it had it checked all the boxes. And so I picked it up and fairly quickly fell in love with it. As Mark had mentioned, we'd also done kind of a cartridge highlight on the 6-ARC where we were exploring its capabilities in a bolt platform as opposed to the very conventional AR platform.
Mm-hmm.
Because I looked at it right away and I looked at the numbers that the ARs were getting and I thought there's more potential to this case than we're seeing out of gas guns. Not that it's an inadequate gas gun cartridge, because it certainly is not.
It did really, really well.
Yes, it's extremely formidable, and I really think it's a force multiplier in a gas gun, which I will have a gas gun built in, just because I want one. But in a bolt gun, man, that was a whole different ignition sequence, and I got a completely different vehicle out of that deal.
Well, and what you were looking to do with, this style of rifle, having it be a quotation mark stick rifle, lightweight, petite, easy to carry. You don't want a cartridge with a ton of you want a cartridge that's going to perform and do what you need it to do, but you don't need it to be a 300 or even a 308 or even a 6.5 Creed.
Yep. I wanted the ultimate in control. And again, this is not that I can't drive a 308 or a 300 or an 06 or whatever. It's just fun. And so I wanted something that had a ton of control. And like I said, I wanted everything scaled just for fun. And I think this was as close to perfect as it could get from a case standpoint, and a marriage between cartridge and platform. If I was really particular, it would actually have a 473 bolt face, and it would be like a 308 based case, just smaller. But I'm okay with this. This is super cool.
Yeah, and I will say, and I would encourage anybody to check out that video if they haven't, that 6-ARC terminal test. We shot a variety of bullets that you hand loaded, at least at press time. There weren't a ton of factory offerings on the market. But man, we shot Sierra Game Kings. We shot the 95 grain Barnes LRX. We shot
the Accubon,
ELDX, and I would say all of them performed as advertised. It did really well. And not just because I know you have an affinity for Barnes bullets, but that was a little bit of a standout with penetration. And it mushroomed, famously, and that's what you surprise, that's what you went with.
Yeah. And on that, there were some critics of that LRX specifically and TTSX, because we shot the 80 grain TTSX in the comments section. I don't like to go in there. And
it can be, it can lift you up or it can tear you down.
Oh yeah. And, folks were saying like, oh, I can't believe that you think that's a good idea. There's no wound cavity. There's no wound cavity. There's no wound cavity. I promise you that you can't actually see the wound cavity in the clear gel. You simply can't. And because there's no lead dust, there's no secondary fragmentation, you don't get to see, like the lead bullets, when you hit those clear blocks with them, you get a black or a gray deposit. It's lead dust or smoke or whatever. There's like a residue, and it fills in the inclusions and incursions in the block, and they're not visible in a copper analog because it just cuts the block, and you get no residue. Ergo, when it seals back up, you can't see it. Mark and I have learned kind of the hard way too about clear gel versus ordnance grade gel, that it also, like ordnance grade gel, shows you a dramatically different wound channel. And this is a test that I'll probably on my own time revisit with ordnance gel, because I'd like to find the limit of the cartridge's potential. But if you were watching that video or other videos that we've done where you think that it is lacking in terminal performance because there's not a visual indication present to you, a viewer, of that block when that bullet hits it, it doesn't show up on the camera. It's there. I cross my heart, hope to die, stick a needle in my eye.
Well, and what you just said doesn't discount what we've learned using clear gel or permagel. There's still a lot of information to be gleaned there.
Big time.
But I do think, to a legitimate extent, that the ordnance gel gives us a little bit more accurate,
clearer, big time,
for lack of a better, clearer picture of what
big time.
It translates a little bit better to like what might happen on the game.
Yeah. So there was an intentional selection of this bullet for this case because it is a marginal cartridge. And I, like I said, I'm very...
Okay, you keep saying that. And I would say, yes, it is on the, I guess whatever, the smaller end of the scale of cartridges for big game, right?
Yeah.
But, and I'd say in particular, with your hand loads and a bullet of this grain weight and the velocities to which you're getting it, it is very akin to a 243 that has knocked down a lot of big game.
Yeah.
And not just antelope, not just, medium-sized deer. I mean, there's guys that have shot moose, but I'm not saying this is the optimal moose cartridge. I'm just saying, like, I think it's a little bit more capable than people give it credit for.
Yeah, I agree.
And I say this, as always, in the same breath where you're like, oh, what are you going to hunt with this year? Oh, I'm going to grab the 300 Wisdom.
Yep. But it is small, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like hunting waterfowl or upland game with a 410.
Okay.
You can do it with the right payload, and you can do it famously. I mean, I know guys that have loaded TSS and 410, and they'll go out and they'll fold late season honkers, and they'll absolutely demolish them. Usually, on the marginal side of gauge or caliber, it's best to be really good with that gauge or caliber if you're going to deploy or employ that, because your margin of error is so minor. Because we're not working with massive velocity. We're not working with super heavy payload. We're not, everything gets a little bit more challenging, and you have to be a little bit more deliberate and precise with your execution shot in order to be successful with it. So it's like if somebody asked me like, hey, I'm thinking about bringing, my son or daughter, they're small, duck hunting. Should I get them a 410? Usually I'll say no, because it's very hard to be very effective with a 410. You've got to be quite a skilled wing shooter. If you're gonna shoot, roosted birds on water or landed birds on a field, different story, right? But for like winged game, 410 is not a great thing. Just like I wouldn't say like make the 6-arc your son or daughter's first Western big game hunting rifle, unless they shoot it a lot. There's a little bit of work to be done with the case, with the cartridge, with the performance to make it really spectacular, because you have very little leeway. But because it was, and I restate this, a marginal cartridge, I wanted a bullet that was going to give me maximum performance. And when you look back at that test, and I'm kind of glad it worked out the way it did. Another bullet
because it confirmed your biases.
Yeah, well, there's that, but it also educated me. So another bullet that I was really excited to test was the Sierra Tipped Game King, who my buddy Jordan started loading in 6GT, sort of really similar format, several years ago, and he's been very successful with it, specifically on mule deer. So he's got a really cool build in 6GT, and he was shooting that Tipped Game King, and kind of like woke me up to it, because it's been a bullet that's been on my radar, but not really high on my radar, or on my scale of bullets to hunt with. But I was like, this thing, the numbers are good. It's a Sierra product. They are the bullet smiths, and everything about it was pretty darn attractive. And in shooting it, it performed very, very admirably. One thing it lacked was the ability to penetrate really deep, which I am gonzo about. And people have been like, you get hung up on penetration. Let me tell you why. So my pronghorn hunt, found a buck first morning, great buck. And I was very enthusiastic about getting over to him. And the long and short of it is the shot angle and opportunity that I had on him was rough. So it was a hard quartering away shot. And I'm trying to put myself back in that mental space. I had a very small window before he disappeared for the second time into a draw that I was going to end up having to relocate in a very short amount of time, a fairly good distance to try to get on top of or in front of. And then I was going to run into a property boundary. And so the opportunity that I had on that buck was a hard quartering away shot, 286 yards. And
sticks, bipod pack.
Spartan spring box.
Okay.
Yep. So seated position, Spartan spring box deployed. Kind of a slight, or not slight, but fairly severe declination on the hill. So I'm like digging my boot heels in, and I've got the sticks out, and I've got a rock solid position. Really great product. Cannot say that enough. 286 yards, seconds to confirm distance, check dope, engage. And so with these bullets in particular, I've started trying to be really cognizant of, instead of picking my entrance point, picking my exit point, because I've come to find that they have a tendency to do that, like leave the target. And because of that shot angle and my position relative to him and his position on not flat ground, my opportunity was just forward of what would be his hips. So I did not have a broadside shot presentation where I could say like, okay, I'm putting it right, on that third rib, fourth rib, or whatever. It was like forward of his hips. And I knew that bullet was going to pop out somewhere like base of neck or like into on shoulder, or excuse me, off shoulder, but into that shoulder. And so I got up, safety off, everything was checked, pulled the slack out of that 2-stage trigger in the Howa, touched off. And here's the coolest part about it, and what really made me quite thrilled with it. It has almost no perceivable recoil. So upon firing, I watched the bullet hit where I had intended it to go. I watched the bullet hit the bank behind him. That was probably like 20 yards back. Big puff of dust on that bank. And of course he lurches and he takes off, and he made it all of 15 yards and then just piled up and toast. And I thought, okay. So I had to punch through. Like I said, bullet entrance was just forward to hip. Into that soft tissue, there's no rib cage or anything like that. Like, it would be a gut shot when you look at it from the attack angle.
That's what I was going to ask. Did you get into the paunch, or did it clear it?
Somehow, and I do not understand the mysteries of the deep here. I did a fairly involved necropsy on him. I mean, he was very dead, so there was no questions in my mind, like what had happened with that bullet's journey. I did not perf the stomach. I don't know how, but the stomach came out completely intact. And it was very full too.
Interesting.
Yes. So I didn't hit the stomach. And so what I have to imagine is either the angle that he was kind of at or on impact, like things just moved out of the way enough that I just didn't hit it.
Where did the bullet exit?
Exactly where I thought it would. So it's hit the shoulder, it hit the scapula, so like the big blade structure, right? At the front of the scapula, and punched out that side of him. So forward of the shoulder, I guess it where his collarbone would be.
Kind of like, whatever Antelope's clavicle area is.
At like the neck-shoulder junction. Mm-hmm. And he was cooked. Heart and lung, the heart was hit high. The lung was destroyed, and massive hemorrhaging. And the exit hole was what I have come to kind of appreciate with these things. I should say exit through the thoracic, so not exit through the hide, but exit through the thoracic. So I'm quartering everything, right? So if we do the field quarter on pronghorn, once I peel the quarter off, you see this very large, I would say probably size of a quarter, maybe a little bit larger in diameter than a quarter, like perfect excision of tissue out of them. And like I said, it might have been a 15-ish yard bolt that he made, and then he just piled up. And devastating performance. Goose was cooked. So I was very thrilled with that. So that was critter number 1. And then critter number 2 was with you and Jim. We were out hunting deer. It was the first night.
Yes.
It was first night. A doe had walked out underneath the blind. Like, I could not see her from any of the windows. And then from the woods came...
circling like a great white.
That's right.
The great whitetail.
3 other does had come out with her too, and it was 2 adults and then 2 younger deer. Not like fawns, but younger deer. And they were kind of mulling around pretty close, and everybody either had a head up or a head down at that time. And there was not a stellar opportunity for me to present arms and execute a shot. without alerting them of my presence in that blind. And they were a little spooked out anyways. They could tell something was weird.
Opening day in Wisconsin can put a deer on edge.
Yeah. And there was also a really, really nice coyote at 300-ish yards in the field. And so I'm sitting here doing math, and I'm not one to just zap a coyote. Jim wants no coyotes because Jim has poultry. And this was very sporting, so I was cool with it. And I'm trying to work out how I can hit the deer, cycle out, and hit the coyote, if it's possible. And these deer start walking out into this this little egg plot that I'm on. And they're walking in such a way that I would either have a complete facing away shot, which I don't love, because I'm going to have to pick one of the back straps to destroy, or I'm going to have to try to push it through a ham, and I'm not doing that with this cartridge. Or I'm going to have to try to take like a cranial shot, which I don't also love once the distances start getting a little spicy. And so they're kind of in this ball and in a straight line, and they're walking out, and I'm like, well, I have to hope that they stop and turn and begin feeding out. And I would say that the field is probably, what do you reckon that strip is wide? 40 to 60?
I'm trying to think. Did you shoot it to the south or the west of you?
Would be due south. Straight south. Straight out front.
Oh, yeah, it's probably like, 50 yards.
50 yards wide. So it's a narrow strip, 50 yards wide. And they're walking like down the perfect center of it. And I've selected one of the does that I think I'm going to shoot because the other two younger deer are not attending her very much. They're kind of attending this other one. So I don't know what the situation was here. Was this an adult with another adult that has two younger deer with it, or what it was? She peels off and they clear each other, and she gives me it was mostly broadside, but it's like quarter off. So I attack on the left side of the animal. She's facing now at this point due east. Mm-hmm. Attack on the left side of her, and I think I got it third rib from back was my entrance point. And the exit was third rib from front. So just into the shoulder meat a little bit. Did not break the scapula, but just into that kind of like that big.
Just kind of like that muscly part of yeah.
And she made it from her position where I shot her. She made it 10 yards tops and then nose down.
What did she like? What was her reaction at the shot?
Straight bolt toward the crick. And so shot, straight bolt, drop. And she made it 10 yards because she was still in the field. She was running straight for the wood line there, and she just lights out, like dead on her feet, eyes open kind of thing.
Interesting. Didn't like kind of fall down and kick a little bit.
No,
just kind of tipped over.
Just ran and dropped. And so that was pretty cool. What was even more novel is so I'm shooting suppressed, and it's not like it's silent. It's certainly not. Like I think you could probably hear my shot from where you were.
I think so. Yeah.
The other deer ran in a tight circle because they didn't really know why anybody was running. Nobody had a flag up. That doe tipped over. They followed her. And once she was down, they kind of milled around for about 60 to 90 seconds. And then they went right back to feeding. And they got back on that line that they were walking, and they walked out. And then like to my right, to the west, there was, I think, another 5 deer. It was a significant amount. I look over, well, they're all up on their feet, kind of wondering what's going on, what was all the ruckus about. And they went right back to feeding. And in peeling away that deer's hide, which I'm glad you were there to get to see it, to get to look at those exit wounds, entrance and exit. What's really nifty about these bullets, that doe had a decent fat layer on her. That bullet was deployed by the time it entered the thoracic cavity. And that's
big time, yeah.
Yes. It's not a 6 millimeter hole going into that thoracic. Like on the viscera and the muscle tissue on top of the rib cage, basically, there is a large hole in. There's a larger hole out. Through the hide, you just see this little prick on either side, just boop, boop. But she was toast.
When we were breaking her down, one thing that I was a little bit surprised by was the amount, and not that they are looking for this, the amount of shod on the other side.
Oh,
kind of
like that.
on the rib panel
Yep.
and things like that. I was like, to me, it was slightly indicative of something a little bit like what a bigger cartridge might
what you'd
do.
expect, a high velocity, high mass
Yeah.
impact, where there's this radiation of, jellied tissue.
Right.
And this, a lot of people call it like bloodshot, where there's a ton of hemorrhaging radiating around the hole. Now, some of it is blood that's getting like subdermal and laying there. But
that's what I was wondering if part of that was
Yep.
like maybe less the impact and more just like, oh, she was laying on that side. She bled out there. It kind of coagulated a little bit. Like I didn't really dive too deep into like wiping the blood off and seeing like, maybe there was like less quotation mark damage than what appeared. So I guess I also don't want to give a false impression that this is some sort of, magic.
No. That's been my experience with those bullets. One thing I'll say is a lot of people say like less meat damage. I have not observed that necessarily. I would say there's no secondary, so we're not tagging other pieces of meat. But like at the entrance point, and this is coming from somebody who will typically shoot for structure. So like if the opportunity is there for a high shoulder shot and I'm going to punch it through the scapula, like I'm doing it as opposed to tucking it behind the rib. And I do it on purpose because I don't like tracking things and I don't like things not being dead when they used to be alive and I'm trying to kill one. So I want to anchor that thing in place. And so usually I'll shoot that. And what I'll end up with most of the time is that piece of meat on top of that shoulder, the scapula's got that scapular ridge on it. And then there's like two cuts, call them flat irons or whatever you want. One of those things is smoked. And it's just like, for me, an acceptable loss. I'd rather lose 2 pounds of meat than 200 is what I have in my mind. But usually, like when that stuff gets hit, it really takes on a different, it's pulverized. It's all ripped up and shredded. Didn't hit that, which was good. So I actually ate some of those steaks not too long ago. It was fine because I didn't hit the shoulders.
We differ on that a little. I mean, not that I'll shoot a deer through the shoulders if that's the shot that I'm presented. But man, if I've got like a straight broadside or quartering away, I guess that almost demands that you hold off a little bit. But dude, I love to tuck it right behind the shoulder,
and that's totally cool. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. I've done it dozens of times, but my preference is if I have the ability to break them down so they don't have running gear, they can't run.
No, that's true.
Yep. And so circling back, like, why did I select that bullet, the 95 LRX? Do I like Barnes bullets? More than you know. I
think the people do know.
Oh,
Ryan. I think you.
But because of angles of attack, like the pronghorn that I shot, I don't know how long a pronghorn is, but if you measured it from just forward of its hip to the front of its, like the neck shoulder junction, I'm going to go with it's that long.
About 3 feet.
Or a little under.
Yeah.
And full pass through. Devastating everything in its path. If I would have shot that tipped Game King, where we were seeing 14 to 18 inches of penetration, and then shedding mass the whole time and deforming the whole time and potentially taking errant trajectory and path while going through target, I don't think I would have taken that shot.
You don't think so?
No.
I was thinking the opposite, honestly. Like, from what we saw, I mean, maybe not as hard quartering as what you're describing.
No, like it would not have entered my brain as a thing to do with that bullet.
I would say with most shots, with a gun that has a high level of precision and me being able to be in a controlled setting where I know I'm executing, like the bullet is going to go where I want it to go sort of situation. I wouldn't have hesitated to use. I probably would have shot the one that shot best out of my rifle.
That's a very important thing.
Of the ones that we tested. Mm-hmm. Because I thought they all did pretty darn good.
They did. But if I have to negotiate and I'm just going to make up a figure and say 20 inches of tissue, and you said this really, really good, and this is actually not something I ever thought of before you said it. you were talking about an elk hunt that you had gone on, and you were talking about shot angles, and you had said an elk that had been feeding all night on browse, where if you've ever split a stomach open on cervids, and especially like probably not pronghorn because they're eating mostly grass or shoots, soft things, but like elk, deer, and moose.
Well, elk are grazers, though.
Well, yeah, but they'll also pick off, fresh cedar tips or spruce tips, or they'll eat twigs or whatever. Like browse in that capacity is dense, hard material, right? Like a fairly strong fibrous material, and that'll catch or at least deflect potentially a bullet or strip that bullet of like structural integrity. Like we're going to remove pieces of it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we're in my head though, I still go back to, we're talking about antelope and moderately sized deer.
Yep. I'm still not going to drift a bullet through like an abdominal cavity that can't maintain as close to all of its mass as possible. Because if I don't get it there, now I have a problem. Now, had that buck given me that slight turn and I was shooting the TGK, dead.
Yeah, I guess where I'm going with, it wouldn't have taken much for me, much of a turn to be like, yeah, that'll do it.
Yep, dead. But the selection is intentional because sometimes that opportunity does not present itself. And that's that. I mean, he was cooked. And just like I said, it reinforced. I felt really good about it because the bullet shoots unbelievably well. It shoots very quick. It surprised me. I was getting about a 29-20 average from muzzle velocity.
With a 95 grain pill, I mean, that can do some handiwork.
Absolutely it can. And it just worked famously. I wish I would have hunted more deer with it this year because I would have loved to have had more opportunities to test their tissue. And it's such a delightful little gun to carry and so much fun to shoot. I love it so much, I'm building another one.
Interesting.
Yes. Different gun, different layout, equally lightweight.
I mean, you mentioned something earlier, like to me, when you're talking about like, oh, is this the one that I'd give for a kid for the first one? It actually, to me, it is. Like, but just being cognizant of, which you're probably going to stay likely within some of those limitations. Anyway, you want it to be a controlled shot.
Yep.
You want it to be, I would say 300 on the outside.
Yeah.
Right. Hopefully 100 yards. Right. Or in, and that all this, depending on the experience of the youth or small statured person. I look at this as a potential go-to.
I think you're right. Like we had talked when we were doing that test, like, would this be the perfect option for your girls?
I say yes.
Yeah. And you're going to be with them in the blind. Maybe you have a tripod to assist to hold that thing up. You're going to have time. It's going to be like a deliberate walkthrough, place the reticle here, take the shot. And then I think it's great because it's not going to rock their world when they shoot it. Like you can shoot this thing an infinite number of times and never be subjected to stress or duress from recoil, period. Like it's so pleasant to shoot. For those of you who hand load, the powder charge is under 30 grains. I mean, it's barely more than a 223. And which is funny to think about. Like my hottest 223 loads are like 25 and a half with a given powder and bullet combination. And this is just barely more than that. So it's really cool. It's super fun to shoot. And now that I have an effective lifetime supply of brass, it's going to be one that I'm going to shoot a lot more. This was a fun summer because I shot more 6 arc and more 300 WSM than anything else. I shot hundreds of rounds of each hand loaded, and it was so much fun.
This thing kind of looks like a baby 300 WSM.
It does, yeah. Pretty square case. The relationship of the bullets protrusion. It looks a lot. It looks a lot like
the Super WSM.
Super WSM scaled. But yeah, just pleased as punch with it. And again, so much so that I'm building another one.
What's that one going to look like? Or maybe we should just wait.
Yeah, maybe we'll just wait because it's going to be pretty radical for me.
Cool.
Not chassis radical.
What do they call that? What does this say?
It's the hook. Or no.
The tease?
The tease, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
You're such a cartridge tease.
I know.
Cool. Ryan, well, thanks, man.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. These projects that we've done were fun. cool that you got to get some field experience with this cartridge this year.
Yeah.
Cool that it went really well and confirmed, what you thought would happen.
Well, sample size of 2, but
sample size of 2,
we
but
got more critters to hunt.
Oh, maybe we should do. Every time I try to publicly commit to things on the podcast that will make me go do it.
Like buy suppressor.
There's that. That's a big one. But I'm always like, I should coyote hunt more, and like this would be just a fantastic coyote cartridge. So I was like, oh, we should go coyote hunting. But then sometimes we do the thing. Sometimes we don't, and then I feel bad.
Yeah. I wish we had pigs, not for their impact on the environment, but for their usefulness as an effective test medium.
Mm-hmm.
Wish we had pigs.
You could get a lot more samples.
Yeah.
With that.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, cool, Ryan. Thank you. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
See you.
Bye.